Welcome back to another episode of the Startup Therapy Podcast. This is Ryan Rutan, joined as always by my friend, the founder and CEO of Startups.com, Wil Schroter. Will, we talk a lot about big exits as a source of wealth in the startup space, right? And the fact that a bunch of cash hits your account all at once is awesome, right? There's nothing wrong with it. Nothing wrong with it. But why don't we spend a little time today talking about how much value there is in just building something that keeps spitting out cash month after month, year after year?
It's so interesting to me because I don't think most people in the startup space, and Ryan, we kind of like segregate the startup space and startup entrepreneurs from like small business owners, et cetera.
Yeah.
I want to be clear. Small business owners have this shit figured out. Right? Like this is not new information to them, right? And I always laugh because when people talk about VC and startups and everything else like that, and it's the world we live in, we help people raise money at what we do at startups.com. So it's very much our world. I always say that if you walk down your main street of whatever town that you're in, and you look at all of the building monikers for everything, I'm talking like office buildings, I'm talking about like retail buildings, et cetera. More often than not, these are not funded businesses, right? They're massive businesses, huge local employers, whatever they are, but they're not funded businesses. And I love those businesses. I'll give you an example, Ryan. You grew up in the Columbus, Ohio area. You grew up with the Columbus Dispatch. For folks that don't know or don't care, the Columbus Dispatch just happens to be the local newspaper in Columbus. It's essentially a monopoly, right? It has been forever. And they own like some radio stations, some TV stations, et cetera. 100 million years ago, for some reason, they invited me to come speak at their company retreat, right? Uh-huh. And I come out there, and they were so kind. But I started to learn about this business, right? I started to learn about this, homegrown generational business. At the time, they were generating between $50 to $60 million a year in profit.
Not revenue,
decades.
not ARR. Profit. And that's the thing. And they've been doing it forever, right?
Doing it forever. And one of the funny things, this is just, I'm going on the side now, but one of the funny things is where they actually made maybe even more money is because they were so early in this business. Like they've been around in Columbus, I don't know, since like maybe the 20s, maybe earlier. They bought up all the land in Columbus.
Yep.
But they actually made even more money because they had a lot of money early. They invested it. They expanded their portfolio, et cetera. But
they had early access to all this classified selling land back in the day when that was the only way you could do it. They're like, this one's never going to hit print. We'll just go buy that right now.
Yeah. But think about that for a second. A business that generates that kind of money generationally, right? There's like 3-4 different people that would have handed over the reins to this goddamn ATM.
Yeah, giant ATM.
I love businesses like this. My wife used to work at an insurance agency that was started by two guys that I know, great guys. And at one point, same thing. They were like 15 years into the business.
Yeah.
Generating 40 to 50 million net. They were going to buy the Cleveland Cavaliers. And these are guys you would have never heard of in a million years.
Right.
At just like a one-off insurance company, not a dime of venture capital. I love these businesses. And I want to talk about not just getting to that level, but why this path is so important.
Why it is actually so much more common than we think. To your point, these just aren't what we would call startup companies.
Right.
But the fact that we call them startup companies and the fact that they all seem to want to follow this other path that doesn't include just having cash thrown into your pocket every month, a little bizarre. We should probably talk about that. I've got an example too, man. When we were right after we had moved to Florida, and we were in a really nice neighborhood in St. Pete. We were on the cheap side of the street because we were on the dry side. Folks across from us were on the water directly, and watched a guy buy these two houses, couple $1 million a piece, rip them down, combine the lots, and build a monstrosity. Like the guy had more money than design aesthetic, in my opinion. Like he really loved it. This guy had all the toys. Like this guy brought his garbage out to the street using his like 4-wheel 6-passenger thing. Like it was hysterical.
To be fair, I absolutely
had all the toys, had so much fun. What was his business? He rented temporary fencing to construction companies, mostly the government.
That's it, man.
Right. And like, but I remember the moment that I found funniest, I had some interaction with this guy, and he was a funny dude. He'd been running this business for 20 years, profitable from the very beginning. All right. He's like, I didn't even buy my first fence. I rented the fence from another fence rental company, and then I re-rented it to somebody else until I figured out how to charge more for it. And then I started buying my own stuff. So he was profitable from the first deal. We were sitting down with a local VC. It was a founders dinner kind of thing, local VC. And this guy's, it was basically been telling me, like, I don't know why I'm here. Like, I'm not doing anything like anyone else in this room is doing. I was like, well, you're running a business, making money. He's like, yeah, I think that's the distinction I was looking at. But so then this VC turns to him and goes like, so what are the exit plans? Like, you thinking of selling it? I will never forget that I have never seen the word why more clearly expressed on somebody's face without saying it. He just turned to him and he just looked at him like, because he had just regaled us with the tale of like how much money this thing was kicking off, how little time he actually had to spend on it at this point, and what an easy and simple business it was to run. There's lots of stories like this.
I think, we're going to get some folks that look at this and say, well, hold on. You can't tell me for a second that if I had the choice between having a fistful of cash, so to speak, or having to run a business, that I wouldn't rather have the fistful of cash. Fistful of cash is security, it's safety, it's all these things. And the answer is yes, that's entirely true, right? So this isn't to say if you could get to an exit and get a mountain of cash, that's a bad thing. The 100%. Answer is, but you're not going to do that.
Yeah, that's the thing. The probability is so much lower, right? Probability is so much lower.
I think, particularly in the startup world, and again, this only exists in the startup world, we've created this busted narrative that says we've got to get big, we've got to exit for a lot of money. That's the only way to monetize. And I'm like, what are you talking about?
True,
Makes
right?
no sense at all. Like,
here's what's crazy to me about that narrative. Well, apart from the fact that it's just crazy, the thing that I find really, really amusing about that is how long has that been the narrative, Will?
Not that long.
That's the thing. In the grand scheme of things, not that long at all. But like, that didn't even exist when you and I starting businesses.
Right.
We're not spring chickens, but we're not that old either, right?
Right.
So the fact that this has become like such an instantiate, as if this was carved on the backside of Moses's tablets, right? Like, as if this has been around for time immemorial. This is how you do it. It's just not the case, right? But somehow this became absolutely concreted into the myth of what you have to do to start a startup.
This isn't knocking like the, hey, sell something and make money. That's good. Ryan and I have had exits. We like money, right?
Yeah.
That's not really the point, though. The point is, I would love more founders to sit down with us and say, help me make this thing insanely profitable. I hear that request never.
Never.
That's what kills me. No
help
one
me grow up faster. Help me grow up big. Help me exit it.
Yeah. Help me raise money. Help me scale.
By the way, do you know what's really, really, really attractive to an acquirer?
Yeah.
A super profitable business that keeps cash. Like, it is.
And so then we hear these other, like, mischaracterizations, like, oh, well, that's just a lifestyle business. And we've talked about this before.
Yeah, no shit.
I hope so.
What? You have a lifestyle, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, if everything goes well, that's exactly what this is. It blows my mind because I know so many, quote, lifestyle entrepreneurs, friends of mine, other founders, who print money. And they look at it. This is so funny, the outside looking in. They look at what we do as the dumbest way to approach wealth creation. Now, they can't deny that the winners are outsized winners, right?
100%.
But they just don't understand why we take a perfectly good business model that could just make money and fuck it up.
Yeah, by trying to make it bigger than it needs to be, or bigger than it needs to be at that rate, right? Like sooner than it needs to be big.
We've gone through the exit process. We are not anti-exit. We're not anti-capital. What we're trying to say is that the expectation that the only way to build wealth in this thing is to scale and exit and all things is so broken, it's so misleading, and it's so dangerous that what we need to talk about, and what we're about to unpack now, is how should we be looking at a business that just makes money? Like, what does that asset actually look like? Like, what is the value of that asset? So we can start to think about it differently. So I think, Ryan, it'd be worth doing just a little bit of math, okay? The level set. Oh, no, just a little bit. A very small amount. To level set. And here's what I'm hoping we can get folks in the mindset of thinking. Instead of thinking, I want to cash out with $10 million, okay? Which is always, we do whole episodes on why that's a broken idea too. You need to know exactly how much money you need, but that's a different podcast. What I think we should start with is take a look at how much profit your business could make or does make and figure out what the cash equivalent of that is.
Sure.
Ryan, I'll run some easy math.
Start with something modest. Let's start with something modest, something super achievable.
Okay, cool. So let's assume that we get our business to the point where it's generating $10,000 a month in profit, which is what we could use to pay ourselves, whatever. Just $10K in profit. How much cash would we have to have in the bank in order to get that outcome? Well, here's a simple way to look at it. If you look at, not recently because it's been amazing, but if you look at longer term averages of the S&P 500, figure a conservative rate of return is 8% on money. And that's if you've got a balanced portfolio, not all in the S&P, whatever. So you would need to have, after taxes, and I'm going to come back to that in a second, $1.5 million in the bank in order to generate 10K a month the way your business does. Now, in order to get $1.5 million investable, you'd have had to pay taxes on that. And obviously every country is different, but let's use the US. Depending on how and when you got that money, the velocity of it, you could have paid as much as 40 to 50% in taxes.
Okay? So you would have had to double that in terms of a cash event.
You bet. And some people say, wow, that's not true. You'd get, if you sold it all as one thing, you'd get long-term capital. Also true. The point is you would have to have earned well in excess of 1.5 million to ever have 1.5 million. Maybe that's 3 million because you got taxed like crazy as regular income. Maybe that's 2 million because you got it as capital gains. The point is, if you have a business that will consistently generate $10,000 a month, not $10 million a month, $10,000 a month, you have a business that is the equivalent of having $1.5 to $2 million in the bank, and you're just getting started.
That's it. And I think it's super fun to play this out because I think most people would assume that a business doing 10K is worth almost nothing, right? This is the way they look at it. We talk to people all the time.
That's what I'm saying.
Like, I have to fix this. I have to fix this. Like, well, number one, you've already beat 95% of people that start out to do anything because you've gotten to that point, right? Which, by the way, if you set your sights on that as the goal, how much easier does this become to achieve? Right? Because the minute you're like, it has to be 100 million or it's worth nothing to me. Or as we just pointed out, if it's doing 10,000, which they would look at and go like, that doesn't even make any sense. It's so low. It's worth at least 3 million to you, right? Probably more.
Let's build on that a little bit more. Let's use 2 million just so nobody gets hung up on this, what my tax rate was. Okay. Let's use 2 million. What would it have taken for you to build this business to get even a $2 million outcome? Now, let me give you a couple different scenarios, and this is what really starts to mess with your mind a little bit. Number one, let's say we took on some cash, okay? And so we've got a co-founder, we've got investors, et cetera. And best case, we own 20 to 30% of the cap table. Probably not even that, but best case, 20 to 30%, okay? Let's say 25% just to make it real simple.
Easy math.
Okay? And that would be a lot by the time you exit, but let's assume, right? We would have to sell for at least $8 million. And that's before preferences kick in and stuff like that. Because for those that aren't familiar, when you raise money, there's often what's called a preference where you have to pay the amount you raise back to the investor in full, and then you all split your respective shares. So that could easily be $10 million. Okay. At $10 million, you pay back your first $2 million that you raised, let's say. You split the rest. You get 25% of that. You get $2 million. You had to have a $10 million outcome in that scenario in order to earn the same amount that you're earning with a $10,000 a month net profit business. That is mind-blowing.
It's mind-blowing. And also think about this. Would the opposite be true, right? If you have a $10,000 a month profitable business, do you believe that you could sell it for $10 million?
Oh, God, no. Right. Absolutely not.
But you can generate exactly the same benefit.
That's where I was going to head next. Yeah.
That's the fun part of this, right?
Right.
Which is that the probability of that happening so much lower, which is kind of the entire point here.
Well, stick with that. Think of how many businesses you can build to get to a $10,000 outcome. You could mow goddamn lawns and get to a $10,000 outcome, right? You'd be mowing an awful lot of lawns, but you can do it, right?
Yep.
Landscaping companies do it all the time. The amount of optionality you have, if you zoom out a bit and you say, I need to get to $10 million, okay? When you run that, you might be saying 10 million net, in which case, I'm trying to earn a percentage off that. But the probability that you will get to that exit is so insanely small. I hope you get there. Ryan does too, right?
Yeah, of course.
But you probably won't, statistically.
Right.
None of us will, right? Statistically.
Also, for what it's worth, man, like, I'm curious to get your opinion on this, but there's also this weird, like, dead zone of trying to sell companies.
100%.
Where, like, at certain prices, it's actually quite hard in some cases to sell a company for $10 million.
Right.
Why? because it hasn't become really big where you've got acquirers who are just super excited by it. And it's not small enough where it's like a little, my cash out my 401k, buy a business instead, and then go run that quote unquote lifestyle business, right? So you also put yourself into this really weird spot where just not that many businesses transact at that level. And that's not the case to go, oh, well, then you're saying you have to be bigger, Ryan? No, I'm saying take the benefit of the $10,000 business.
Right. A good friend of ours, Andrew Gazdecki, runs acquire.com. And Gaz and I were talking this a couple months ago, and we were talking about not just his business, but the other folks in that space, like Biz, Buy, Sell, et cetera. The reality is, among all of them, they don't do that many transactions. And that's not a knock on them. There's only so many buyers. They can't change that.
It's like running a funding business, right?
Exactly.
Like, there's still going to only be some small percentage of people get funded. That's just the way it works.
Right. We've been running a platform, a funding platform since 2012. I don't know that we've increased the number of investors that invest. We've just given the people who do invest another way to invest. Well, we haven't changed the core factor. Now, for what we want to do, right? When we're building these businesses, we're thinking to ourselves, ultimately, I want it to be my benefit. I want it to come back to me and enrich my life in some way. Well, if we start forcing ourselves down a path with this mentality that it's got to be this go big or go home kind of outcome, we've talked about this a million times. We also prevent ourselves from essentially getting that $2 million asset value. To get a business that's doing $10K a month in profit, so call it $120K a year, you could have a $300,000 business that does that.
You could have a $200,000 business that does that, right? We know plenty of consultants, service-based organizations that do $200K a year,
right,
on like 80% margins, because it's just a factor of time. They're going to pay themselves anyway. So this is what you're paying yourself, right?
100%. And again, when we think about selling, we think about getting this big paycheck, right? And I've gotten some of those paychecks. They're pretty fucking sweet, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, they are. It is a lot of fun to watch the money hit, like to see the wire hit. It's less fun the next day when you pay the taxes, but whatever.
There is that. No, but I cannot tell you when, if, or how I will ever do it again. We sold a business last year. It was a great outcome for us, great exit. But if you had asked us the year before that we knew we were going to sell it, but we had no idea. And so the point is, these things are really hard to predict. But what's not hard to predict? $10,000 of revenue.
No,
now, I'm not saying that it's a layup. I'm not saying it's a given. No lack of businesses have avoided doing it. But if
a lot less of a lottery ticket than an exit.
Yeah, man. If I were getting into a business for the first time, any business, first thought would be, if nothing else, I want to get to $10K a month in profit so that I have built a $2 million asset for myself. Ideally, that pays forever, right? Now, there's those level ups where you're like, well, it gets bigger and now I can hire somebody else to, take some load off my shoulder, et cetera. Those are all the advantages to growing. But the point is, if I want to create $2 million of value, which 99.9% of the world does not have, my threshold for getting there is way lower than people think it is. And by way of that, my approach might be different. You know what I mean?
100%. I think instead of, in that case, especially at that size, I think that what we're really talking about is not looking at exit value, but looking at replacement value.
Replacement value, absolutely, right?
What going back to your example, like we said, in order to get a $2 million outcome personally, based on the average is what it would take to get there, I need to have a $10 million total outcome so that I can land at the same place. The replacement value of that being a $10,000 a month profitable business should be blowing most people's minds right now, because I don't see most founders thinking about it that way.
Right.
When we start to think about what do I actually need to get to that same place, the replacement value, the replacement cost of getting to that same spot, significantly lower, significantly more possible, plausible, and just sort of plotting the course to that is something you can actually do. Whereas to your point, plotting the course to an exit, you can't just say like, oh, well, if we do this, this, and this, then we get bought. It's just not how it works.
Something that's really funny about everything we talk about here is that none of it is new. Everything you're dealing with right now has been done 1,000 times before you, which means the answer already exists. You may just not know it, but that's okay. That's kind of what we're here to do. We talk about this stuff on the show, but we actually solve these problems all day long at groups.startups.com. So if any of this sounds familiar, stop guessing about what to do. Let us just give you the answers to the test and be done with it. Now, one of the interesting things is just about anybody will tell you, yeah, but I'd rather have the cash, as if you had the choice. I'd rather have the cash because cash is making money while I'm sleeping. right?
Right. For everybody
100%.
who has the option right now, everybody who's listening, who has an offer on the table to buy their business for their $10,000 a month
Right.
profitable business for $10 million, and they own 25% of it, please
take
go
it.
ahead. Sign the term sheet.
Tell you to take it. We're
Do the deal. For the other 99.9% of you, keep listening.
There's an interesting caveat to that. There's something interesting, depending on the business. There's something interesting about how a business can become worth exponentially more than the money.
Absolutely.
Let me give you a simple example.
Yep.
We just said, using our math, that a $10,000 a month profit business has the cash value, so to speak, pre-tax of $2 million. Well, what about when we make it a $20,000 a month business? Now that's $4 million. No way in hell, no matter how Warren Buffett you got with that $2 million, you're turning that goddamn thing into $4 million anytime soon.
Yeah, in that same period of time, because going from 10 to 20, again, yes, you're doubling sales or you're doubling revenue, you're doubling something, right? Or you're increasing sales by something, you're reducing costs, whatever it ends up being. Significantly easier in every single possible case.
And more probable.
Than trying to create a 100% outcome in the market or with cash.
Yeah, anytime soon, right? I mean, you can go 10 to 20K a month in 6 months. If you use law of compounding at 2 million to 4 million, depending on what your thresholds and paybacks are, you're at least a decade. At least a decade. That's if you invest all of the money back in and the market treats you well. Now that said, interesting thing to me, especially at these, I'm intentionally using small numbers like 10K a month. I want people to understand that is millions of dollars of actual value, of replacement value. And that when we take that and we start to say, well, man, it's only like year 3 and we're only doing 10K a month. Okay. In 3 years, you created a $2 million asset. Okay. What the hell were you going to do over the last 3 years that was going to put $2 million of asset value onto your balance sheet? Nothing.
So, do I get to do what I usually do, Will, and look at the trades I could have made after the fact?
Exactly when to buy Bitcoin and sell it. The other side of it is, what if we go 10K to 100K? Which the nature of a business, not every business, but a nature of a business is that it has the ability to exponentially grow. I'll give you an example. When I was running my agency back in the day, in 1997, we generated, let me get this right. It was like, I'm going to call it $40 million in billings, but it's not what people think of it. A lot of that's passed through. It's just media that it goes through. And let's say that the fees that we actually captured were closer to $8 to $10 million. And I think the business that year made just over $1 million, just to give you an idea of economics. Now, you could look at it at that point and say, now agencies don't sell for a lot. Services businesses don't sell for a lot. If you're listening and you own one, you're not going to get a lot for your services business. Usually you get 2 to 3 times your gross.
Let's call it 3. Let's give you the best outcome possible here, right? So $3 million exit in 1997, and now you get to compound that.
Or, this was anomalous, but we had a huge agency when we grew the business like crazy, and we grew it to 700 million in billings in about 7 years. Yeah. Now, at that point, that year, if I recall, this is over 25 years ago, we were doing about 20 to 25 million in net income. Number one, you know how few businesses ever even get to that point? Right. Think of how much cash I would have had to have on hand post-tax to get to that level of cash equivalent.
Yeah.
Okay. Now,
it wasn't the 3 million exit back in 97.
Yeah.
Sure.
Now, a couple of caveats there. Caveat number 1, you're still running a business, which has a lot of things that can go wrong, right?
Sure.
I'll give you some examples. By about this time, we've got about $10 million a month in payroll. What that means is when shit goes wrong, it goes really wrong. Really wrong
and really fast. Yep.
And we saw like a hint of this happen when the dot-com bust came. Yep. We weren't a dot-com company, and frankly, most of our clients were pharmaceutical companies that were kind of unimpacted. But we did see impact.
Unimpacted or dot-com buy. Prozac did well in that period.
We were representing Prozac. Stock went way up. But what was interesting about that is a lot of our clients that were outside of pharmaceuticals, like Best Buy was a big client of ours. Best Buy calls up and we had a $5 million engagement with them, right? A fee engagement. And they were like, this is dot-com bust. They were like, hey, by the way, that's going to go away. They're like, wait, what? And I've got like a whole crew of people, like almost a small agency.
Yeah, I hired a wing of the building to deliver this for you.
Exactly, right? And they're like, nope, gone. I'm like, oh, shit. Next phone call I get is actually a pharmaceutical company called Wyeth Ayers. And and Wyeth is like, hey, that $500,000 invoice you have out to us, we're just going to go ahead and not pay it.
Yeah,
And I'm like, wait, what? Like
huh?
that's even possible? And they're like, do what you're gonna do about it. And my point is, things can also go the other direction very
Sure,
quickly, right?
sure.
Money isn't 100% safe either, right? But you can diversify a bit. Now, yes, the business, continued to grow, and that was a good thing. But at the same time, that could have gone very differently. There were no lack of companies at that time that got hit in the opposite direction. Ryan, I'm curious if your history being in the web design business, do you remember a company called US Web?
Oh yes.
Then became March 1st. They were the 10,000-pound gorilla in the web design space. I mean,
Yep.
fun side note, just because I actually just read about the founder in a bunch of magazines this past week. Joe Fromage, who's the founder, genius guy, but kind of crazy. I remember back then, this is stupid history. This has nothing to do with the episode. I just have to say because it's at the top of my head, and it's ridiculous. You got to look him up. He's this genius guy that made a ton of money doing US Web, whatever. When the dot-com bust hit, it crushed them. Okay, so here's a guy who was, billionaire status, wiped out, but was very convinced during that time and wrote this huge expose that all meaningful technology in the US was actually given to us by aliens. And that's the only way we've been able to make that. And he's been pursuing this alien thing for the last 25 years. And there's this whole expose on him. It's hilarious. Anyway, for guys like Joe Fromage, things can go the other direction too. Yeah. Aliens and all. It's amazing to me because you could take a business that, again, was doing incredibly well like that and watch it do a hard turn. When we were looking at our business, why did we sell it if it was doing so well? For that reason. Because also at any given time, but also there was money on the table, right? Yep. It wasn't like
there was money on the table, right?
Right. So we had
go back to the option. Go back to what we talked about before, which is that like in 1997, $1 million in profit a year. There weren't any buyers. Like nobody was like, we'd love to buy what would be a very, very boutique agency at that point. Like nobody cares, right? Nobody needs that. So at that point, you had a good business. You could have just kept cash flowing at $1 million a year, and that compounds too. And that's nice. And that's what we're talking about today. But by virtue of staying in the game and continuing to do that, not selling at that point, again, probably wasn't even anybody to buy it at that point, you stuck around. How often do we talk about this? Just like by virtue of being in the market, things can happen. How often has, by virtue of your money being in the market, have you seen 2, 3, 4, 500% increases in a single year?
Right.
I mean, the percentage increase for you guys at that point when you went and won that massive contract, almost not incalculable, but massive outcome.
Yeah, it was like 1,000%.
Better than Bitcoin, right? Like you're very rarely going to see that anywhere else. Business has that capability.
And like everything else we're talking about, those are the total one-offs. Like forget about the fluke. Yeah, sure, it happened, but who cares, right? But when we're talking about going from $10K a month to $20K a month, that ain't a fluke. That's what businesses do all the time. Like that's just very common.
Work and grind. Yep.
Right. And so if we're saying that for every 10K, it's $2 million equivalent, right? That means at which point we hit 50K net, that's the equivalent of us having $10 million in cash. Again, pre-tax from an asset value standpoint. And a lot of people, when they think about building a business to 50K a month, which is no slouch, by the way, I want to be clear, like that's awesome. But when they think about building a business to that size, they don't think about it like they've just created an 8-figure asset, right? No. They just look at the 50K. And yet we get so fired up about this concept of selling for, $10 million or whatever that number is, when in reality, we can get to the same outcome way easier in way shorter of time and actually make it happen.
Yeah, exactly. And actually make it happen, right? Because the probabilities are on our side. Look, nothing's certain, but there's a hell of a lot more certainty than around if we grow this, if we become this size, then someone with more cash who needs exactly what we went and built will come and buy us.
I got to tell you, for most of my adult life, in my career, I've had 2 assets. I've had a cash asset and I've had a business asset. I've watched plenty of fluctuations in both, right?
Yep.
Every time you think your cash asset's where it's really at, the market takes a total shit and you're like, oh, thank God I have the business asset. Every time the business asset takes a total shit, you're like, thank God I had the cash asset, right? So I've lived with both assets for the better part of 30 years. And I got to tell you, I have so much more confidence in the business than I do in the cash.
Well, you have so much more agency in the business.
That's what I mean.
Of course, you're dealing with the market. You have so much more agency. How much agency as a retail trader do you have in the market?
And I'm a very conservative investor. My investing strategy is earning more won't change my life a lot, but losing it all will definitely change my life a lot. So again, I'm more conservative. So I'm a little less prone to like big swings in the market or a particular stock price or stuff like that. I'm more of a portfolio trader and always have been because while I'm very risk intensive when it comes to business, I am very risk averse when it comes to my own money.
But it's not even about the risk aversion. I think it's like, again, like because in this case, the risk is entirely in someone else's hands.
Right.
Lots of other people's hands.
Yeah.
Global politics hands. Not that businesses aren't affected by some of those same things, but like I can pivot a business.
Right.
I can't pivot a stock.
Yeah, what's interesting to me is, again, when I look at the two, and it's rare that folks have the option of looking at, both their business and their money and saying, which one should I be more concerned about? I look at my money as more of like the safety net of what I've done so far, like that kind of the payback for putting 30 years into something, right? And a little bit of safety net that comes with that. And I look at my business as the future of how I'm going to make money or the definition of my future net worth. When I think, if I were to go back, Ryan, if I were to rewind back, say 30 years and I'm starting all over for the first time, all I would focus on, all I would give a shit about is 10K a month. I would be honestly, Ryan, I'm not even sure I'd care how I got there. In other words, if I had to put together this hodgepodge startup that was services, that was, some SaaS,
because ultimately,
whatever.
How you got there doesn't actually matter because the outcome is still the same.
You bet. All I would be focused on is saying, I just need to get to that 10K threshold, and then I can operate. I can always do something as a human on this planet with 10K of cash to be able to operate and maneuver for the rest of my life. So even if my first business idea, and I want to structure this, even if my first business idea isn't even $1 million business, meaning $1 million of revenue, it's a $300,000 business. It's a $250,000 business.
Yeah.
I don't really care so long as two things are true. My path to 10K looks very clear. Again, it's going to take time and effort to get there, and I might not, but at least I have a clear vision to it, okay? Sure. The second is that I can get past 10K. I say that part because there also is a bit of a challenge with capping out at 10K.
There's no compounding. There's nothing after. Then it kind of depends, right? Because at that point, does that just become part of a portfolio? Is that something that just goes under management, continues to kick off cash? Lots of ways to think about that. But let me ask a question because I'm curious about how you'd approach this one, which is you see the clear path to 10K. If the path beyond 10K becomes a little more opaque, does that make you say no to starting that at that point? Would you say like, because I can't see, but I really do believe I can get to 10K, and I believe I'll learn some things along the way that will teach me how to get beyond 10K. You still okay with that? Yeah,
I am.
Okay.
The idea is if I'm doing something that just has a very hard cap on 10K, right? And that's all I can really do with it, then sure. But if I can look at it and say, that's what I'd be doing up to 10K, but after that, I'd do product expansion, market expansion, things like that, I'm cool. And the reality, too, is depending on your lifestyle and your expectations, you may never need to get past 25K. I mean, at 25K in most of the world, you're living awfully well. And so there's really not much you can't do in most of the world at that point. So I always look at it as, well, shit, if I can get to that point, and now I've unlocked like 98% of what life can give me, I'm good. If I don't get to the other 2%, who cares?
Well, also becomes a lot easier to get to that other 2% if you have that level of stability and you're already that far ahead, right? Like you're building from that point.
Absolutely aligned. But I think my vision for how I would approach things, and we talk about this in other episodes, where optimize for probability, not size.
Yes.
Absolutely the best advice ever as far as what I've seen for young entrepreneurs or, first-time entrepreneurs getting into this, and them saying, okay, I want the big numbers, but you can get to the big numbers with small numbers. Like, that's what's interesting to me.
I know very few businesses who didn't pass through the small numbers on their way to the big numbers.
Yep.
Plenty of people who aimed for big numbers and never hit the small ones. And I think that's something else that it's very, very hard to realize when you start to do this. We talk about it a lot in terms of, I think it's very clear to see when you start taking the funded path. Right? The funded path says, there are now only a couple of ways that the people who gave me money get paid back, which means we now have to go hit these big outcomes.
Yep.
We're not allowed to stop on the way and say, hey, you know what? Actually, we hit 25K in profitability per month, and that feels great to me. Your investors go, yeah, but it leaves us high and dry. You can't stop there. However, if you start and you build to that 25K, then you can go, hey, you know what? It might actually be fun to scale the hell out of this thing.
Right.
Let's do it. Let's grow bigger.
Yep.
You can choose to go from I'm not even going to call it small because 25K a month in profit's not small.
It's not.
But you can go from there as big as you want. You can't aim big and then fall back on that and expect everybody to just accept that and let you do it.
The last thing I want to throw out there, though, is the compounding effect of time in a couple ways. A lot of times we'll look at our business right now and we'll say, oh, it's a 5K a month business. It's, not a big business. Today it is. And just because it didn't go from 5K to 50K in 12 months doesn't mean you don't get from 5K to 50K in 10 years. And someone's going to look at it and go like, oh my God, that's heresy, Will. 10 years, 5K to 50K? Not if you're the one making the money. There's one of the things that when I talk to founders who have been doing this for a long time, what they'll all tell you, and what we all miss in our youth being our 20s and 30s in most cases, right? What we all miss, the value of consistently making money over a long period of time, it adds up in ways most people don't think about.
Yep.
Specifically, it allows you to pay off debts, which then frees that money up to make investments, which then makes more money. Just a factor of time. I'm 50 years old. I bought my house when I was 25, 26, and paid it off. At some point, I didn't have a mortgage anymore. How many people don't have a mortgage or rent payment or anything else like that and could otherwise take that money and invest it instead? I didn't have any credit cards. I didn't have any debt. So it allowed me to take that free cash flow and reinvest it, which then goes to make more money. Now, here's what's more important. When you start doing that early in your career, the compounding effect there is insane. Most people don't get it. I didn't get it until later on in life.
Yeah. No, I think it's important, and it can drive decisions, right? If you aim for that, right, which you aim for that $10,000 a month business, which starts to allow me to pay those things down instead of deferring that debt, deferring those, or even buying the house in the first place, deferring having the family.
Yep.
If you push off some of these costs until later, until you've made it, right, or until you have your big exit, and just knowing that most people won't, means that all you've done is defer paying that stuff down. You're going to pay for it later.
You bet.
Yeah, I mean, kids are a big one too.
Yeah.
Right? Like at some point, our kids are going to, I have an army that lives at my house.
You do.
Point, I'm less responsible for them.
Right.
All those things do happen. Right? So yeah, being around and continue to compound over time has a ton of, and just even just how things change. It's funny. It's funny that he came up today, but this guy that I knew that had the rental business, I was going back to some of the challenges that he had in terms of running that business. There was a fair amount, and it wasn't huge, but there was a fair amount of like human intensivity, but around like really like admin level stuff. And I was just thinking the other day, I was like, man, I wonder how excited he is about AI, because I'll bet it made running that business even easier for him, because that was kind of his only gripe left was, that it still pulled him in a couple times a week where he had to do stuff. He's like, I'd rather just go get on my boat and go, which was in his backyard. Right. So yeah, it's funny, but that was a function of time.
Right. And when I watch all of my friends who are a bit older than me, which is getting harder and harder to do, that are older than me, right, in our like, the point where they've like exited out of their business, like the old fashioned way where they've like given it over to kids or things like that. And they talk about how much money their business has generated in the lifespan of their business. There's a really well-known hair salon. I don't know what the word I'm looking for. Owner here in town, lives across the street, or used to live across the street from me. And he built a $30 million business, right, by doing hair salons. Local business, okay? Phenomenal guy, one of my best friends. Over the life of his business, he's like 70. Over the life of his business, he's made like $50 million, right? Yeah. From this business. This business has generated $50 million doing hair.
With
net,
no exit.
not gross, right?
Yeah. No, absolutely. No, it's significantly more than that in gross, but with no exit.
Right. But when he looks at it in that context, right? Yeah. He's like, damn, right? Who would have guessed? Like, that's doing hair.
Yeah.
When you take a factor of time and you apply it to what this asset is that we're creating here, it is mind-blowing how much it's actually worth. So here's what I would say. I think for folks that are thinking about building the business or running the business or scaling the business, just take a step back for a minute. Take a step back and think about what the value, the long-term value of even 10K is, 20K, 30K, a number you can achieve, and a number that you can actually have full agency around, do things on your own terms, and get the big outcome that everyone else is trying to raise money for.
Overthinking your startup because you're going it alone? You don't have to, and honestly, you shouldn't, because instead, you can learn directly from peers who've been in your shoes. Connect with bootstrapped founders and the advisors helping them win in the Startups.com community. Check out the Startups.com community at www.startups.com to see if it's for you. Could be just the thing you need. I hope to see you inside.